Hello, everybody. Welcome to Women's Political Collaborative of Tennessee's webinar, Domestic Violence in a Pandemic. I'm Tabitha Robinson, and I'm a board member and the co-vice president of membership for WPCTN. Thank you, members, for being here today. I also know we have some guests on the webinar as well, and I want to extend a warm welcome to our guest on the call today. Guest, if you enjoy this program or you've enjoyed some of our many programming that we have had over the past few weeks during this pandemic, I really highly encourage you to become a member of WPCTN. Our dues are reasonable and go to our goal of promoting women's political issues. We are nonpartisan, collaborative, and welcome everyone no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. If you'd like some more information, you can visit WPCTN.com. And if you'd like to talk to me about membership, I'd be so happy to assist you. I'll leave my email in the comments. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to keep your mics muted and your videos off so we can focus on the speakers. But the chat bar will be open for questions and comments as well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Charles, who will introduce our panel speakers. Jenny is the president-elect for WPCTN, and she is an assistant district attorney in the office of the District Attorney General for Nashville and Davidson County. Jenny, take it from here.
Thank you, Tabitha. This program is so exciting, and you would have thought we had secured Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama, because we have had the most participants register out of all of our Zoom programs throughout the pandemic for this one on domestic violence. I want to quickly introduce our panelists today. We were very lucky to secure them. These three women are in the trenches, so to speak. They fight for domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims here in Nashville and also in Middle Tennessee. First, we have Rachel Freeman, who is the president of the Sexual Assault Center. Next, we have Diane Lance, who is the department head of the Metro Nashville-Davidson County Office of Family Safety. And next, we have Sharon Robertson, who is the president and CEO of the YWCA for the Nashville and Middle Tennessee. I want to get right down to it, and we have many questions. We have some questions that were emailed to us. And if you have a question throughout the panel that you think of, just shoot it to me on the chat line and I will address that to the panel. I want to first ask, and this is for all panelists, but Diane, I'd like to hear from you first. Do we have any data since March of 2020 throughout the month of May suggesting that arrests for domestic violence misdemeanors or violent crime in general is increasing, has stayed about the same, or has decreased?
Okay, well, thanks, Jenny, and I appreciate being asked to be part of this call, and Joyce as well. Just real fast, I have a virtual background behind me, and in case anyone hasn't seen the inside of the Family Safety Center at 610 Murfreesboro Pike, this is what it looks like. It's got a wonderful play space and a living room and really warm and welcoming atmosphere. Great question. And I think across the country, some areas are reporting that domestic violence and violent crime has gone up, and some are saying it's static, and some are saying it's going down. So here in Davidson County, we are seeing, when it comes to domestic violence, decreases. I think anyone who has a background in this area knows that this is not because there is less domestic violence happening in our community, but less reports of domestic violence. So our 911 call center has seen a 24% decrease. General Sessions Court has a 27% decrease in charged defendants and a 28% decrease in domestic violence individual charges. Criminal court has a 49% decrease in domestic violence criminal defendants and a 48% decrease in domestic violence cases. Again, that part was criminal court. We're seeing a 33% decrease in order of protection filings. So in terms of getting numbers from police, I can't pull out domestic violence numbers separate for that. So I could do it for ECC, for 911, I could do it for courts, but for police numbers, I can only just pull out violent crime generally. We are seeing 6% increase in violent offenses. That's unusual across the country, actually, I believe. I think I saw an article recently that said it was a handful that are seeing it go up in police reports. 13% increase in aggravated assault police reports, and a reduction in police reports for rape, and 75% increase in homicides. That's going from 20 this time last year to 35. Although domestic violence homicides have stayed pretty much exactly the same year to date compared to 2019 and 2020. So, I think everyone on the panel can speak to what this says. It speaks to the fact that domestic violence victims are more reluctant to call the police into their home in these situations. I think what our advocates across the community are seeing is that when domestic violence victims do call the police or do come in for an order of protection, we're seeing the injuries and the level of violence is more severe. So when you look at underreported crimes going down, that speaks volumes to the reasoning.
Thank you for that, Diane. And you may be able to speak to this and maybe not, but when you say that the violent crime rate is increasing, does that comprise things like homicide, rape? Is that a specific list of offenses?
So the violent offenses, I believe, would include, any crime against a person that involves violence. So that would be assaults and aggravated assaults. So the 6% increase in violent offenses generally, the 13% increase in aggravated assault reports to police. But those are crimes that can be typically reported. When you look at the ones that are traditionally drastically underreported, such as rape, domestic violence, those are the violent offenses reports that have gone down. So because these people are potentially submerged living with their offender, and it's even harder or there's more reluctance to report. And so it's really interesting that it's flip-flopped for those crimes that are traditionally underreported.
That is very interesting. I would have predicted it would have shot up, but I think that there's something to be said for people just not reporting these crimes, especially when you're quarantined at home with your abuser. Let's go to Sharon, and then I want to ask Rachel the same question. Beginning in March of 2020, did the YWCA and Sexual Assault Center see an increase, a decrease? Has it stayed about the same in women seeking services?
Let me start off. Initially, right after the tornadoes hit Nashville, we really didn't have a surge of individuals seeking shelter because we run the largest domestic violence shelter in this region. Our calls really spiked. I will say at the same time, we were already implementing texting capacity. So individuals can now have a text line to the YW, which gives them another avenue to communicate with us. The numbers then went down as far as our 24-hour crisis line to about 30%, and they've leveled off during this period to 20%. Here's the things that you need to understand. It's more than speculation that people are not leaving because of COVID-19. In the texts that we have, as well as the calls, one of the largest concerns that individuals have is it safe from the virus to come into the Weaver Center? And we work very hard. I'm here every day. This isn't a virtual background. This is Weaver. I'm here right now. We've gone to extraordinary measures to make sure that this is very safe as possible from the virus. But we do know there were individuals that hesitated. With that said, as time has progressed, as I sit here today with a 65-bed shelter, we are in care of 64 individuals, 5 of whom are families that we have to put in a hotel because as a result of COVID-19, we've had to segment off part of this building in case someone shows signs of illness and they can stay in those rooms. It also took the children's playroom, and so we've repositioned the room I'm in right now for the children to have a resource. But right now, our numbers are off, I call off the chain. They are significantly increasing as people feel more comfortable leaving the situation, because they've been in these houses for a long time in some very dangerous situations. Now that things are opening up, they feel much more comfortable because we are beyond capacity. When we have 5 families, even with our rooms closed in hotels, then that is above capacity for domestic violence spaces in the city. And we do not see that changing. More and more people want to come into shelter because they've reached, I guess, that tipping point. And I was wondering, I said, well, maybe we can get through this, but I think as things open up, they feel like they can get safety. And 30 of those 64, 32 are children. And that is a lot of children to take care of and feed. And we're doing everything we can to make sure they stay safe. And I was dedicated at the beginning of this mission to not turn people away. And we're not going to start now because I feel like we've been through the real heat, but it is definitely challenging. And we are seeing definitely the number of people that are seeking actual shelters increasing dramatically in the last 2 weeks.
Thank you, Sharon. Rachel, what are you seeing at the Sexual Assault Center?
Thanks so much, Jenny. We're seeing an increase now, but when the crises started in early March with the tornado, as Sharon was saying, and then COVID-19, the pandemic happening, we had a significant lull during the month of March. We saw an overall decrease in all of our services, from the SAFE clinic, the sexual assault forensic exam clinic, to our individual counseling. March's numbers were really low. And that seemed to be consistent across our community, with reports to Department of Children's Services, with reports to police. Everything seemed to just really hit a lull as our city struggled to deal with being hit by one crisis after another. But as April went on, we did start seeing an increase. The month of April, what we normally do, our main service is providing outpatient counseling. So we saw the same number of people and provided the same number of sessions in April as we did in January and February. And we did that 100% remotely. So that, I think, said a lot for the need that people have right now, the need that victims and survivors have to maintain that sense of safety and support. So the fact that so many people were willing to adapt and transition to telehealth and remote services was very telling to us. What we've seen a decrease in, though, is the number of children seeking help and support and the number of children disclosing, and that is heartbreaking because there are so many people who are not safer at home. There are so many children who are unfortunately living with their perpetrator. And the same is true for women in domestic violence and intimate partner relationships. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen an increase in the SAFE clinic numbers. So we unfortunately had to close the SAFE clinic in late March because we did not have the personal protection equipment to keep victims and survivors and our staff safe in the clinic. And we closed for 3 weeks and we reopened in mid-April. And in the 6 weeks we've been reopened, we've provided 15 exams. So even though there is still a safer at home directive, even though we're just now in phase 2, and even though we were essentially sheltering at home, rape was still happening, just as domestic violence has been happening. And people have still been coming out and seeking the help and the immediate support that they need. So 15 exams for an underreported crime is a lot. And we expect that as the weather gets nicer, as bars and restaurants are reopening, as people are out and about a lot, that those numbers are only going to rise. Last year, April was the highest month for reported for sexual assault exams in our clinic. And that's not the case this April, but we expect May and June to keep picking up. And that's just an unfortunate reality in our community, that this is still happening, even as we're all struggling to deal with being safer at home. These crimes are still happening, and we have to figure out new and creative ways to support the people who are being harmed in their homes and who are being harmed in our city. And that's our new challenge.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you a question dealing with the children. You said that you've seen a decrease in reports of sexual abuse of children. and this is speculation on my part, but I want to get your take on this. Do you think that that's due to the reduced interaction between children and mandatory reporters, such as nurses and teachers? Kids aren't in the classroom due to COVID. Everyone shifted to homeschool. Not as many doctor's appointments are happening. Or do you think that doesn't have anything to do with it? It may not be related.
No, I think you're exactly right. And Diane can probably speak to it too. But we very strongly believe that the primary reason that reports in child sexual abuse have gone down is because children don't have access to other safety people, other support people. There aren't disclosures being made in the school system. There aren't guidance counselors checking in with the children in person like they would if schools were in session. There aren't Sunday school classes where children are turning to other support and safe people for these issues. That they are only having contact within the context of their home. And if the abuse is happening in the home, the resources have decreased significantly. So we have to creatively think of ways to encourage children to disclose or to report or to equip parents in the home with the tools that they need to help keep their children safe. But we're also, as an organization, bracing ourselves for a significant surge in the need for children receiving these services, and a surge in reports once children have access to other people again.
Thank you. Diane, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, I think Rachel hit the nail on the head that we're going to see a surge in all of these areas. When you deal with interpersonal violence, whether that be the intimate partner or the child in the home, there are a lot of stressors in these homes right now, with everyone being contained in the same household. Even in the best of circumstances, small children in the home, out of schools, no camps, whatever the case may be, unemployment in the household. All these additional stressors make things even harder. And in terms of violence in the home, one of the highest risk factors in interpersonal violence cases is when the offender's unemployed. And that's one of the top things you look at for the risk of being killed or seriously injured. And we have a lot of offenders who are unemployed in the homes right now.
And one more interesting fact about the child sexual abuse cases is the National Sexual Assault Hotline saw half of their calls in the month of April came from children, from minors. And most of those calls were coming in through chats, through the online chatting.
Mm-hmm.
But they've never in the history of the National Sexual Assault Crisis Line had that many minors reaching out. But during the month of April, over half of the people connecting to them were minors.
So children were directly calling the National Sexual Assault Center.
Correct.
Or teenagers. Yes.
And we've been in touch with our sister organizations of YWs across the country, and some of the spots that early on had to shelter in place, like in the Seattle area of Washington State and in California and even in New York. And they followed our pattern. They started off with sort of this lull and people were staying in. And then they had the surge, and it's identical to what we are experiencing here in Nashville. It's just that they experienced it earlier. So they told us to be prepared for this. I didn't know it would happen so fast with so many people. Hopefully we can stretch our resources enough to continue to use our hotels, but we are seeing exactly what the other YWs that offer domestic violence services have seen.
This next question is for all three panelists. We may have somebody on this Zoom session that is going through some sort of abuse. We just never know. And what are some practical action steps during this time if a woman is in either a physically or sexually abusive relationship? What would you advise her to take with her if she needs to get out of the house and immediately leave? What are some practical items that she needs to grab before she leaves?
Go on, Sharon.
I would start off, first of all, be very, very careful if you choose to leave, because it's easy to say, I'm fed up in the heat of passion, I want to leave, I just can't take this. but leaving during that time is when you are most at danger. And so you have to make sure, should you decide to leave, that you do it safely. If you do not have an understanding of what that means for your particular situation, you can call the YW's crisis line, 1-800-334-4628, if it's safe to call, or we do have the texting capability, and that's 615-983-5170. So if you don't understand what I mean by leaving safely, there's a counselor there that can help you walk through the steps. With that said, and this is something that we have issues when people come in and they have no ID, no nothing, etc. We work through it, but if you have some form of identification, it is helpful. But that's part of safety planning, to have the documents and things that you need in a place should you decide to leave. And it's much more difficult. You can't go to work and then leave from work. We found out that most of our intakes happen during business hours, believe it or not, but that's often a window of opportunity. And with children out of school, everyone's at home, it's much more difficult. But with that said, that would be the biggest advice, to do it safely and make sure you have what you need to try to start your next steps.
Yeah, I'd agree with Sharon, leaving safely. That's the highest risk time for victims. In terms of what they need to have with them, their driver's license, social security card if they have it, phone charger, medications, and if they're leaving with children, their children's documents. So those are some critical things to have on you. But one of the main things in any safety plan across the country when leaving your offender in order to leave safely is to leave at a time when your offender's not in the home. That is really hard to do right now. So we have on our website, I'm sure the YWCA, their call takers say the same thing. We have a safety plan just especially for these hard times with the virus. And it's basically how to implement your safety plan when your offender's in the home. Things such as, pay attention to the abuser's in-house daily routine. It used to be their routine of coming and going. What is their routine in the house? When do they go into a separate room for a longer period of time? Gather your essential items while doing your daily chores. If you're in charge of the laundry, that's a great time to gather those essential items and keep them in the bottom of, let's say, the laundry basket, a place that the offender doesn't access usually. Identify safe individuals you can stay with in case there's a delay in getting into the shelter. One of the hard things right now is friends and family may not take people in during this time. Find a reason to be outside when you're about to leave. Not, I'm leaving and I'm walking out the door with the kids, but the kids need some fresh air. We're going to walk around the neighborhood, let the kids run, or I'm going to go get something out of my car. What is your reason to walking outside that door? And create a routine of you being in charge of some essential errand outside the home. So it's not unusual if you're running to the store to get the paper towels or to get the food. So those are some of the specific tips that we have during this time.
Rachel, can you speak to this?
A little bit. The tips for sexual assault safety are just a little bit different, but one of the most important things if someone has recently experienced a sexual assault is the time sensitivity around seeking an exam. Even if someone is not sure that they want to file a police report, or if they don't know that they want the kit tested, or even considering pressing charges, the collection of evidence is the most time sensitive piece of things to do. And you can do that without knowing what you're going to do next. And our crisis line and our advocates can walk you through that process 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But the exam process has to happen within 5 days. And depending on the extent of the assault, it could be as little as 24 hours up to 5 days. So depending on if it was rape versus molestation and fondling, the time frame might be smaller. So we really encourage people to not feel like you have to make up your mind for every step that's going to be part of your journey in the immediate crisis moment, but to take the small steps, one step at a time. And the ones that are the most time sensitive for sexual assault would be the evidence collection. And like Sharon and Diane have both said, We also have a crisis line that's available to really help people problem solve and safety plan uniquely to this situation, and really assessing what does safety mean now for you, because safety now is very different than it was 6 months ago. Who are your support people and how can you cancel them? I mean, how can you not cancel? How can you contact them? How is it by Zoom? Is it by text? But what are the ways that you can connect with your safe people? And what are the coping skills? And the coping skills that survivors are using right now are different than they used to be, because you can't necessarily go meet a friend for coffee. And some people are comfortable taking walks together and some aren't. And some people use exercising and gyms as their outlet and one of their coping skills. So many survival coping skills have been taken away during this time. So part of the safety planning process is really, what do you have available right now to cope best in this situation? And that's what our advocates and counselors work individually with each person with, because it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and we have to adapt it in these times and for each person.
Rachel, go ahead, Diane.
Sorry, Jenny, I forgot to mention a couple other really important things when leaving is don't return to the home without a police escort. We have seen that a tragic situation, certainly last year, where a victim was killed going back to the home. And then also to immediately turn off the location services on the phone.
That's good. Rachel, let me go back to you really quickly. It used to be that if a woman was raped, if there was a sexual assault, she had to go to Nashville General Hospital, and that is no more, correct? Can you briefly hit on where a woman should report for an exam?
Yeah, so Jenny, you're right. For decades, the only place in Nashville to go for an exam has been Nashville General Hospital up until 2 years ago, actually. 2 years ago, with the help and support of these partners here on the call now, Diane was extremely instrumental in helping us through this process, and the YW as well. We have created a non-hospital setting, and that's the SAFE Clinic. That's what I've referred to a few different times. The Sexual Assault Forensic Exam Clinic is now the hub, essentially, for rape exams in the Middle Tennessee community. It's not just for residents of Nashville. We see people from out of state. We see people from across the state. We see tourists. But the purpose for having a non-hospital location for exams is that 80 to 90% of sexual assault survivors do not need the care of an emergency room. So it's more cost efficient to do it in the exam in our SAFE Clinic, but it's also the best thing for victims and survivors, because the Sexual Assault Center staff and volunteers are exclusively dedicated to dealing with sexual assault issues. So we have created this space on our campus that is an extension of what we've already been doing for 42 years. And that's providing compassionate, loving care to victims and survivors of sexual assault. So you come into the SAFE Clinic and you're greeted by an advocate, and then we partner with the Nashville General team of sexual assault nurse examiners. So the group of people who've been providing these exams for the last few decades in our city are the ones who are coming to our clinic. But now people have choices. So even though the Sexual Assault Center is the hub for receiving exams at this time, Nashville General Hospital still provides them in their hospital, and Vanderbilt provides them at their hospital as well. And they have a large team of sexual assault nurse examiners, and our advocates respond to that hospital as well as Nashville General Hospital. And then Skyline Medical Center recently joined in on this, and that's another location that people can go. So we're extremely proud of the work that the Sexual Assault Task Force has undertaken through Diane Lance at the helm of that, to really expand the ability for people to have power and control in their next steps after they've been raped. We know that one of the biggest things that happens when somebody experiences a sexual assault is that their power and control has been taken away from them, and requiring that someone go to one specific place that may not be the place they would choose. We now have choices for people, and we are making sure that the exams are provided in the most compassionate, trauma-informed way, and we're very proud of that. And because of doing that, we've seen a significant increase in the number of people seeking exams in our city.
Jenny, I think it's really important to point out that Nashville put in the hard work years before this crisis, and we are very fortunate. For what Rachel's saying, we have a traveling team, we have a stationary team doing these exams, we have hospital, non-hospital location. People come from around the country to study that model. We have the largest shelter provider in the state. It is a national model, the YWCA, how we do things in our shelter service provision. We have the national model for family justice centers, what's behind me, and our court-based center is award-winning across the country. So for 5, 6, 7 beyond years, Nashville has been working to be the best in all of these areas. And that's not even to mention what we do, what Thistle Farms does for trafficking victims. It's phenomenal. So our city should be very, very proud. And when the surge comes, Nashville is well equipped with facilities, the people that work in this area to handle it. It's just enough people to provide the help that's needed, which I know you're going to ask more about, funding for nonprofits and things like that later.
Enough money to fund the people, and
Yeah.
enough people to do the work.
Sharon, let me go to you. This is a question that I've always had. When I was a little girl, my mother used to take me to a family it was a women's shelter, and I didn't really know where we were going. This was in the late 80s, early 90s, before the dawn of cell phones. How do you prevent knowledge of the locations of the shelters from getting out? Say a woman enters in to the shelter and her abuser is calling her, and she gives out the location. How do you prevent that?
That is really, I guess there are several answers to that question. One of which is, before you come into shelter, we walk the individual through the process of how you disable the locator services on all of their computer, laptops, cell phones. And we make it very clear this is a private location. Part of the rules of being here is you do not disclose this location outside of you being here. I mean, you do not tell anyone, even your family, your mother, no one should know this location. So we make that very clear, and that's something we have really, really do enforce and emphasize. If you've ever visited the Weaver Center, we have significant security. You just can't walk up. We have a significant fencing. And I call this really old school technology, because my dream for the Weaver Center is for us to have the kind of technology that really provides modern day security, which means, you really security. Some centers visited, they're in plain sight. This is the address of the center, but they have different things that are now more modern day ways of staying safe. We do depend on our security. It's very good. It's a very safe, secure location. Just looking into the future, much as we've done before in Nashville, and seeing what are the ways that we can use technology, since the world has changed, to make it even more secure. So in staying secure, we always seek to do better. But I will say that we do walk you through the process. So the locator services on your cell phone are very, very dangerous when coming into shelter. We have to make sure those are turned off.
Diane, let me ask you a question we're getting at the DA's office quite a bit is, can I ask for an order of protection and do it via Zoom? I have a case right now with a young woman, and there's a pending aggravated assault and aggravated burglary, and she relocated to New York, actually in the city. She's in New York City, and I don't think she can leave, where she wasn't able to leave a couple of weeks ago. Are the courts accommodating those who want to just petition via Zoom? Can you kind of give us the lay of the land on that? Are we just in a wait and see mode, or do we know?
All right, so I'll walk you through kind of what's been happening with orders of protection. So brace yourself. So I'm going to use the terms. There's the ex parte order of protection. That's the temporary order of protection until you have the hearing. Okay, so those are the two terms I'm going to use. So let's back up to people that already have an order of protection and it was going to expire during this time. So that orders of protection that would have expired, because orders of protection are for up to a year, between March 13th and May 31st were extended by the Tennessee Supreme Court through June 15th. Okay, so people have to file to extend their orders of protection, but that's been a little grace period. It also says that the court anticipates that there will be no further extensions of this deadline. Okay, so that's important to know. Between March 13th to June 15th is that little bit of a grace period. All right, so that's for people that have already been granted order protection and it's about to expire. So let's go back and talk about ex partes. There's been some pretty good changes there, but not all the way to what you're talking about. So before, to get an ex parte order of protections, victims would come to the center that you see behind me, and they would meet with one of our advocates. And our advocates would listen to what's going on, help type up the paperwork, help take down the dictation of the narrative of what happened. We would submit that ex parte paperwork electronically to the night court commissioners. And the night court commissioner would either grant it or issue a fiat. If it's a fiat, it's not binding as an ex parte order of protection. Nothing is in place until it's heard before a judge at the hearing. The hearing, I think it's like 2 weeks later. So 10 days, 2 weeks later. So then that's how it was. So the governor issued Executive Order 26, which waived some of the notary rules, which has been very, very helpful during this time. So now a victim, a petitioner can come to the Family Safety Center here behind me and do all of the same things, but they don't have to testify before the commissioner to get that ex parte, that temporary order of protection. They can just sign it electronically and that's it, okay? Then we got to reach the next stage, which now victims don't even have to come in to get that ex parte order of protection, which has been really great. So our advocates who are remote can, from their home, help a victim from that victim's home, get the entire order of protection done. If they don't have the technology to sign something electronically, they do need to come into our center. But if they have the technology, they can sign it electronically, and then we will email them the signed order of ex parte order of protection, okay? So again, that's the temporary order of protection. The Supreme Court of Tennessee was very, very clear that they still need to have the in-person hearing to grant the actual year-long order of protection. And by the fact that that was explicitly written, I don't see that going away anytime soon. So as far as the ex parte going forward, so I told you what it was, what it is now, but what about, a month from now, 2 months from now? We are working to get, we have a lot of notaries on our staff, but in order for a victim to not have to come in, we have to have staff certified to be remote notaries, which means we can notarize something without being in the same room with the petitioner, meaning they can be in their home still or at the shelter. And so once we complete that certification process, which I think is very soon, we can continue to help with that ex parte order of protection with the victim never leaving the shelter and never leaving their home or their workplace. But again, that's the temporary order of protection.
Diane, the technology that you spoke of to sign that, to electronically sign that ex parte order of protection, I'm assuming that would be a smartphone, a computer. Is that about right? Okay.
It is. We're just using DocuSign, but you definitely need a computer, Wi-Fi and or smartphone.
And so looking into our crystal ball, and I know this is difficult to predict, but do you foresee situations in the future in which during that in-person hearing that goes on in General Sessions Court in the A.A. Birch building or over in the historic courthouse, do you foresee those being able to be done remotely via Zoom, say?
All right, well, that's a tricky question, Jenny. I can't speak to that. for our local jurisdiction. It is happening around the country. Most of the calls that we're on, these type of Zoom trainings and things, people are talking about how they're taking remote testimony. So all I can say is we at the Office of Family Safety are going to be prepared. So we are purchasing equipment that will allow video conferencing anywhere. So we are buying enough equipment that people can video conference for. Maybe they want to talk to someone at the Weaver Center and we can do it that way. Maybe they need to talk to the Sexual Assault Center, we can do it that way. And if the courts need, we don't know what's going to happen with this virus, if the courts need victims to testify from a remote location, we will be prepared. We have not been asked or called upon to do that as of this point, but we will be ready in case that happens, because we do want this process to truly work for victims. One of our deepest concerns is some of the courthouse rules involve no children coming into the courthouse. Well, you know, if you're a victim of domestic violence, your kids are coming along with you, especially now with schools out, no camps, no alternatives. So that's going to be that could potentially be a very high dismissal rate. You know, if I have to find some lady down the road to leave my kids with during this time, I'm not coming to court. So we're really concerned about that, about children in court.
Thank you, Diane. This question is for all three of the panelists. Let's shift now to everyone's favorite topic, money. During the pandemic, folks running for political office, nonprofits have had to get pretty creative at how you're going to raise money. And what I'm hearing from friends running from office, from board members on various nonprofits, is that you can either have a virtual fundraiser, which you're really cutting from whole cloth on that, that's kind of uncharted waters, or you can begin to call individual donors and have phone time with them. And folks are answering their phones. They'll answer their phones if they don't recognize the number, which is unique. And sometimes they'll want to just chat for longer than normal because they're at home and they don't have much else to do. Can you all speak to what you've done, what works, what hasn't worked?
Well, at the YW, right when the pandemic hit Nashville and we had the Safer at Home initiative, we were getting ready to have our largest fundraising event, which is our annual spring breakfast. And usually we net, over close to 300,000, 250 was our goal for this year to net that amount. We moved that to a virtual event. It's usually 1,000 people in a room and most of the gifts are given that day. We were fortunate that our corporate sponsors stayed with us. I think our message was very strong. And so we were able to, on a virtual event, raise $184,000, which is significant. It's the first time we ever did it. We took advantage of social media. We pushed our message. We talked to everyone about the need, which the need is even more important now than ever. We were able to do that. Going into the future, there are a lot of unknowns because it's not only trying to do things virtually, the economics of the city and the nation. Now, I will say this, in other times of stress, people have become more generous. So I'm hopeful that that will be the case now. But this is a little bit of a unique situation because, I was an economics major in college and I was trying to figure out why this was a recession versus a depression, because it seemed like it kind of fit all the ticker boxes for a depression. And, I've never had to raise money in a depression. So hopefully people will still see that at the end of the day, we want people to be safe in Nashville. And we're willing to do this. We're putting ourselves out there physically, emotionally, mentally, in order to make it happen. If they provide us with the funding, I know I'll be here.
Rachel, what about the Sexual Assault Center?
Yeah, so very similar to Sharon, it's a tricky situation right now. It's different. It's uncharted territories. And I think we're all trying to learn from each other and connect with donors to figure out what works for them right now. We also had an April fundraising event. It's not our biggest fundraiser, but it's our second biggest fundraiser. It was scheduled for April 1st, and we decided to completely cancel it. And, you know, we still look back and wonder, should we have done virtual or not? But we instead took the approach of doing more just kind of grassroots fundraising through social media. We have not raised what we projected to raise in a room with hundreds of people, but we are still looking at new and different ways to keep that going. The bigger question for us is the fall. Our biggest fundraiser is in the fall, and it's scheduled to be September 26th. That's our Mad Hatter Gala, where we normally have about 400 to 500 people in a room, and it's a really fun night that's focused a little bit on our mission, but just really a large group of people getting together to support these issues. And one of the best parts of it is the auction. And it is very difficult at this particular point in time to solicit items for an auction, because so many of the small businesses that we would normally turn to and that normally very generously give for our auction, they are the ones hurting right now. So we're having to not only balance being compassionate with those people who may not be able to give as much and not wanting to make asks when we know they're inappropriate asks, but then also recognizing that people aren't ready to come to a several hundred person event. Right now, right before this meeting, we had a meeting to try and figure out how to handle Mad Hatter, and we're still debating whether it's a live event with more of a tiered approach and not so many people, or if it's virtual, or if it's a hybrid of the two. So more information to come on that. But as Sharon mentioned, it's more important now than ever to fundraise. We have all talked about the expectation of the surge in demand for our services. And we're rolling into a recession as we need more. We need to serve more people. We need more support to do that. We're trying to balance that as best we can. I found it interesting that our staff and our clients have so well weathered this crisis as best as I think anybody possibly can. But now we're having to brace ourselves for the crisis that lies ahead of the increase in demand and the decrease in funds. So it's an uncertain time, to say the least. Have to get creative.
Yeah. Diane, let me shift to you for the last question I have, and all the folks who were on here listening, please submit your questions in the chat line and we'll get those to the panelists. As you know, as everybody on the panel knows, time is the biggest enemy for prosecutions of domestic violence and sexual assault. As time goes on, especially if the person charged with a crime is on bond, there is more time to begin coercion, get back together. And as time wears on, I can't tell you how many times this has happened. A victim has said to me, Jenny, everything happened exactly like it did in the warrant. I was raped, I was beaten, but it's been 2 years and I've got to get on with my life. There are certain tactics we take in the district attorney's office to strengthen the cases and even go forward, or we're even able to go forward sometimes without the victim being there if there was prior testimony given at a preliminary hearing. They call me the jail phone call queen because I listen to jail phone calls on just about every single case I have, and I do that because 90% of the time they net something, especially on those first calls. We're seeing defendants on bond, every defendant on bond, no matter if it's domestic violence or not, being pushed off months. I mean, we're talking August, September for alleged crimes that happened, a year ago. Can you speak to some of the challenges that, and I know you walk side by side, you and your staff walk side by side with some of these women throughout the entire pendency of their case. Can you speak to what you foresee? What are the challenges? Just what you're seeing in general?
So, Jen, that is, by the way, everyone, a sign of a great prosecutor when they listen to all the jail calls. That is really
Oh,
sharp.
I recruit my husband.
And that is absolutely the right thing to do. So kudos to Jenny on that. I can speak from a variety of hats. I'm a former prosecutor, obviously run the 2 family justice centers. It's all common sense. It's exactly what Jenny said. Time is never on your side. On these cases, there is ample time for coercion, to not testify in court. Family members, friends, gang associates, all can put pressure on a victim. That leaves more time for reconciliation, despite risks. I think it's really important to remember in any circumstances, regardless of delay and the virus, that when victims of domestic violence call the police, they're not necessarily RSVPing to the whole party, to, the preliminary hearing, going to general sessions court, going to a jury trial. They are picking up the phone and calling the police because they want the violence to stop in that moment. Most likely something was just scary enough that they thought they might be killed, or risk to other family members in the household. So that call to 911 is, I need this to stop, I'm scared. I need to make sure he may have fled, he or she may have fled, but then might come back again. So I need to be protected in that moment. But along with a 911 call comes an enormous mandatory, yes, RSVP to an entire process that we all work in. And so victims may not want that. And the more time that passes, the less that's in it for their personal safety, for them to testify. Maybe he has been staying away, so maybe I'll aggravate that if I come to court. There's so many angles to look at that from. And I just mentioned that because it can be really easy to say, oh, she doesn't care anyway because she's not showing up to court. Well, even in the best of times before this virus, it is a 72-day wait for your case to be completed, from arrest to the disposition of a bond case in General Sessions Court for domestic violence. 70 days. That's a long time.
And Diane, that's just for bond cases?
That's just for bond cases. For criminal court, it's before the virus, all the implications of this virus, 179 days. So that's a long time. So, and I can't even imagine, we don't have the numbers yet of how long that delay is. I want court to be safe. I'm actually not the proponent for rushing back to handle the backlog. The last thing we need to do with these vulnerable populations is for them to catch something and have to deal with that on top of what they're already dealing with. Courts are opening back up in a limited extent with controlled dockets on June 1st. I hope that's highly successful. We can't open our court center for victims yet, which means there's not going to be that safe and separate waiting place for victims in court until our center can open. And it's just too small to open until later stages of the mayor's plan. So again, it's concerning. I think the Supreme Court's recommendations when remote testimony can be utilized for where everyone's happy with it, that should be utilized, I think for negotiations to be able to happen as much as possible in these cases, to prevent more people having to come to court. That should be happening. And again, I'm so deeply concerned about what happens to these cases with children, not being able to really come to the courthouse.
Thank you, Diane. And I think that's such an important point that we lose sight of, is that picking up the phone and calling 911, it's not necessarily, how did you phrase that? I loved it. I may use that in my next jury trial. An RSVP to sign up.
Yeah, it's not, you don't think you're, giving a yes reply to an invitation to participate in our whole process. That's our process. That benefit, that's our process. That's our job, the DA's job as servants of public safety, to prosecute those cases and take them forward. Victims just wanted the violence and risk to stop in that moment. And then they have their own risk equations in their head of how to manage it.
We have a question. This is for all three of the panelists. How will Metro budget cuts impact the Family Safety Center and other nonprofits?
So, Mayor Cooper, has just done a really fantastic job, keeping, the budgets whole for departments. And we're really pleased with the effort and the hard work and thoughtfulness around that. I will say that CARES Act funds are available, and I am hopeful that those will be heavily utilized for these nonprofits on this panel and others in some of our priority areas, which does include sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse. And CARES Act funds can be used to help victims, people who have been impacted by the virus. And it's hard to find anyone that hasn't been impacted. Doesn't mean you got the virus, but it has impacted your life. And those funds can be used, for a variety of purposes, including can be used to help nonprofits. Again, as long as you can show that the funds have been used to help someone who has been impacted by the virus, and those funds can only be used until December 31st. So that is a lever that Metro government has to not only help agencies within the government, but also the nonprofits outside the government serving these particularly vulnerable people.
And
Thank you for that.
What Diane said is absolutely the case. I will say that both the Metro Nashville government has been really, really working hard to make sure these essential services are covered. And I also want to say also our state government partners have been phenomenal in working with us and being very flexible, because I think they see that there's a need to keep people safe in the community.
Rachel, did you have anything to add?
I just would like to reiterate what Diane and Sharon have both said. It's been impressive to see what our leaders have done and how they too are taking seriously these issues, the crimes against women and children and men, and even the foundations in town. Everybody is really being very cognizant of the fact that not everybody is safer at home, and they're asking the right questions to figure out how they can best support and how they can pivot their funding. For example, several foundations have allowed many nonprofits to make adjustments to their grants and their outcomes right now, so that we can use them as we need them now and over the next several months as we continue to deal with and cope with this crisis. So we're really appreciative of all of this, the financial support.
Ladies, thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time. I thank you for your time today, and I thank you all for the work that you do in our community. Nashville is lucky to have the three of you. That's about all we have. I don't see any other questions. I want to let everybody on here know that our next Lunch and Learn is going to be Friday, June 5th. And we were lucky enough to secure Judge Sheila Calloway, in which we're going to discuss juvenile court. So I hope you join us. Check out our website, the Women's Political Collaborative of Tennessee, and see our next event and get registered. Thank you all so much, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks,
Jenny.
Joyce.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Joyce, too.